Back in the old saddle.
Get your buttons back.
Got my buttons back. We got
the
an intro
music
song
back,
again.
the launch music, yeah.
Yeah. Back at it. We finished our all of our missions recap videos, so figure we set the table back up. I like the couches though. It was kind of nice for a little bit.
It was cool, but it wasn't cool carrying them down every time we
were borrowing them from the welcome center.
Kind of rough.
It's a couple weeks I forgot, and then here we are.
Though. Here we are.
Yeah.
Familiar territory.
Exactly. Well, we got this week. Let's see. This is posted on Wednesday. Thursday will be Thanksgiving.
Yep.
So surely nobody will be listening to this on Thanksgiving, but we figured today. Maybe.
I will.
Will you?
No.
Just sitting at the Thanksgiving table. We'll share what we're thankful for. I'm thankful for the podcast. Let's listen to it.
If you don't mind. Thursday. We'll be in Knoxville. So
yeah. But we figured for this week, since we just finished Govember, Mike was here this weekend, we'd kind of talk through his message a little bit, talk through this one, but it may be a little bit of a shorter one since it's a holiday week and all that comes along with that. So yeah, we've wrapped up Govember.
We did
a lot of great things that we were able to do and be a part of for Govember. Why don't we start with this? What is the point of Govember? Why do we as a manual, why don't we dedicate a whole month for something like Govember?
Yeah. Well,
we should have John down here.
We should. I think I'm not sure November is the best time to do that.
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole other conversation that our listeners don't need to hear. But I mean, because I think November is just hard. I think November is hard. I think there's a lot of things that are happening, and a lot of things get layered on top of each other, and it just makes it difficult to figure out what you're going to do. So, but you're launching your mission trips for the next year, and it's just it's hard to figure out any time when it's best to do something like that.
That's what I was going to say. If you back it up more, then you start pushing into like early school year and summer. We did it last year. We actually did it. I guess it was for 2023. But we did it in January, and that was too late because then it's all rushed getting ready. So then we did it in November of 2023 for 2024, and so.
Well, and what other month is like sounds cool?
Right, that's true.
Goctober, like that doesn't work. Go April.
There's got to be another pun we could throw in there.
I was thinking of one, but y'all won't bleep me. So. Couldn't be December. December's so full.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, all that said, so you asked the why question. I think most people, and again, we've been having these why discussions, which are good, but I think most people feel like it's the why is we just kind of talk about where we're going to go next year, and here's when we're going, and here's how much it costs. Instead of realizing it should be a month of really focusing on, man, how do we think about living missionally in our world? So, crafting sermons around it, and like if we're going to do it right, then because I think again it feels like an add-on right now, but because it's just there's so much going on. That's the problem. There's so much going on, and you just kind of throw it in there, and the people and it's we've done good with getting people engaged and involved in missions. But then there's a why to ask for that, because I think you've got people that may ask the question, well, why do I need to go on a trip?
Yeah.
Why is that important? Well, because you need to, because the Bible says so, because the Great Commission uses the language in the uttermost parts of the world, so instead of realizing, hey, this is a part of my growth path, and, man, this is an opportunity for me to help make my faith known, and my commitment to Christ is his commission. Like there's a lot of great whys to that, but again, it's connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And I think that's always the challenge in church life is we do a bunch of stuff. It's funny. I've always heard people use this illustration, and it's so true about like, if you just throw enough Jell-O at the wall, something's going to stick. So what you do is you just throw tons of Jell-O at the wall. And sometimes in church life, if you're not careful, you can feel like that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
Like you're just slinging Jell-O at the wall, hoping something sticks. And or a lot of people will say the shotgun approach of, hey, I'm just, let's just kind of shoot it out there, broad range, and hopefully it's going to kind of hit somewhere, And when you do that, you find yourself, in a shotgun shell, there's a ton of tiny little bitty pellets. And each one of those pellets represent work, effort, time, resources, if we're looking at in that illustration. And it's like, okay, you're doing it hoping something connects, instead of just, let's get a little more kind of a rifle approach to what we do. So, and I think that's a good process that a church goes through when you kind of start realizing, hey, we can't just keep doing tons of stuff all the time,
Well, I think too, it's the term equipping is relatively new to Emmanuel, and I think it just takes time to figure out, wait a minute, just because I may not be able to go on mission physically, it doesn't mean that my part's any less. Right. My part to pray, and if I'm able, give and support those who are physically called and are obedient to that. These equipping events that we had this weekend and last night was so enlightening. As far as telling us what's going on outside of our bubble, because we're kind of in a bubble.
Absolutely in a bubble. No question about that.
I think that's what where you were going also, just figuring out, okay, we've called our people, or we've challenged our people to go.
Right.
We have enlightened them of opportunities. We've attempted to equip. So we're just kind of in a holding pattern of making that happen. Right.
Yeah.
All right. The actual participation part.
And I think what pushes me over the edge to say, yes, I'll go to Northern England this year. Yes, I'll go to New York. Yes, I'll go to Greenville. Yes, I'll go to the Middle East, to Cyprus. And I think that's because, if it's not connected to my discipleship path, then I'm just like, oh man, I'm busy. I got this. So I throw it in the mix of everything else I value. Right. And I kind of see where it rises to the top.
Yeah.
And that one is kind of like, oh man, it seems kind of extra, and I don't really have time for that this year. So what forces it to kind of rise to the top?
Right.
I think that's the question we have to help people clarify in their life.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was great. It was great for me, great month. And I think a lot of times the Lord uses those types of things in our lives, like those of us who are responsible for providing what we provide to our people, so that can give us clarity to help them understand better. I think it's incorrect to look at an event like we had last night and judge our church people against their attendance or not,
Oh, for sure.
or lack of attendance, because I just think a lot of our people are like, yeah, I'm not going on a mission trip next year, so I don't know that I need to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Instead of realizing it was so much more than that. It was a great, it was a great picture of, hey, this is what we can easily become.
Yeah.
And Mike's such a good guy, man.
He is.
Mike Taylor's such a good dude. He's just
to
real, down to earth, very practical. Was a student pastor for 30 years, and he was like when I talk about he was a student pastor, he was like one of the leading student pastors in the country. Like he was top notch guy.
Yeah.
He was just one of those guys that led in some of the really large churches back in the day, and so he's a really, really sharp guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike could easily be pastoring many churches in this country if he wanted to, but he's just the Lord got a hold of his heart, and took him to Europe, and I actually went with him on one of his first trips, which is kind of interesting, in the early '90s. So he and I knew each other in student ministry. Then we reconnected when he was involved in it was called UK USA Ministries, is what it was back in the day, and so I started going with him when I was leading another ministry, and went on a vision trip with him, and just loved it. Fell in love with Northern England, loved that area. And I joke with him because he always pokes at me when he sees me. He's like, dude, when you coming back? I'm like, bro, I can't right now. Like, I can't do it right now, because he knows I love that area.
Yeah.
Like, I just love that area. And so it's you fall in love with it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you realize that, like Mike referenced yesterday, so much of our spiritual heritage is from there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you think that, Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment movements, all those things brought the gospel to the United States of America, to us. And now they are less than 3% evangelized.
Yeah.
2.9% of Europe would say they know Christ.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just a whole different world than what it was, which is hard to believe.
It is. Crazy. And I thought he did a great job last night of elaborating on that point, especially those percentages. It really, to me, stuck out the realness of lostness.
Yeah.
And it's packaged, as he says, with indifference.
Yep. Yeah. Then he said they just don't care.
No.
They don't want to be bothered.
Don't want to be bothered.
I don't remember what his phrases were.
Can't be bothered.
Yeah. But just to think that they
can
just
hear that in a British accent. I can't be bothered.
Yeah. But,
I'm terrible at accents, so I was probably.
But it does.
But I can hear. I can't say it, but I can hear it.
Yeah.
Let me hear you do it, Jeff. I can't be bothered.
No. Patty's geeking me up. Like, come on, do it. You're awesome. You're awesome. Yeah. I bet it would be great. It blows my mind. Like, even when I was over there, and this was back in the 90s, and we got a chance to go to King's Academy and speak in the schools. And, even back then they were like, oh, we're so glad you guys are here. Because we got to actually go in and speak to a high school. And they said, you can speak on anything you want to speak. We want you to speak on Christianity, but you just can't ask people to join Christianity. But you can say anything you want to say. So, I mean, it was completely wide open. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're inviting me into the school system to tell these kids who Jesus Christ is and what he's done for them. Absolutely. They have no fear or threat from it whatsoever.
Yeah, because to them it's just education.
No, it's history, dude.
Yep.
It's like they love it that you're there because you're the experts in that history because there's nobody there that is.
Yep.
So they're like, oh, this is great. Please come.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's the craziest thing. And the next day they're going to have a Muslim speaker. The next day they're going to have a, whatever world religion but for them it's just historical and it's just, yeah. And you just go, really? Like, you sure? Because in the States, like, we can't talk about Jesus, but you want me to come over here and talk about Jesus.
Yeah.
And, but it's an amazing, it's amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But the whole month is, I've come to really look forward to it. It is a busy time of the year, but just being reminded and prayerfully reminding our whole body of the importance of what we've been called to do. Because, we talked about it on the coming back from the New York trip. While we're there, we're trained on the 411 discipleship method. And the four main questions we're answering in that is, just in general, most Christians don't know what a disciple is, what it means to make a disciple. Like, we know Jesus says go and make disciples, but so the four questions are, why do I need to make a disciple? Who am I going to disciple? What am I going to say? And then when am I going to do it? And so kind of nailing those down. It's a really cool way of thinking through discipleship. But the number one of that, why do I need to make a disciple, really answers why we do Govember. Jesus' last command before he left the earth was, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Like, that's Jesus' last thing he said before he ascended into heaven. So it's pretty important. And then we look in 2 Corinthians where Paul said that, I just completely lost it. Anyone who is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, all things become new. And then it gets to the fact that, like, the reason we are to go and make a disciple is because, we are disciples. And you can't be a disciple without being someone who goes and makes disciples. Like, that's part of discipleship. It's not just coming to church and learning and hearing how it, affects our life and what we're supposed to be doing. Like, what we're supposed to be doing is making disciples.
Right.
And so part of that is going on trips, and a lot of that is just how that affects our everyday life, and that's what what Mike spoke to, what a lot of these events were speaking to. So,
what's funny about that is that I can remember when I got saved back in 1985. One of the first books I was given to read is a book by Walter Heinrichsen called "Disciples Are Made, Not Born." And I'll never forget, and that's why I remember Walter Heinrichsen, and the name of the book, because it made such an impact on me to realize that, like, even back then, back then in 1985, it's the same thing we're talking about today. Like the language and the vernacular doesn't change. But back then, I think we were becoming very pragmatic on what it means to be a disciple and how to make a disciple. And so I remember reading that book, Disciples Are Made, Not Born. And so, Christians are born. We're born again into the family of God. And so we're converted. We become changed. We get a new life. And then the discipleship process begins, because the word disciple just means follower. You could be a follower of anything. It wasn't a religious term. You could have been a disciple of many number of things, right? But if you're a disciple of Christ, then you were a follower of Christ. Many rabbis had disciples, and they would just learn under that particular teacher. And so it was common in their culture. And so you were just a disciple of Jesus Christ. But we became very pragmatic back then. And so we had the Paul Timothy model. And so that became very popular. And then we had it actually mapped out. I actually took a class in seminary called Discipleship Evangelism from Roy Fish. And Dr. Fish talked to us about, okay, find a person, okay, on your first meeting, talk about these things. On your second meeting, you talk about these things. On your third, so it became very pragmatic, very much, hey, in 10 meetings, you're going to be a disciple, And so, and it wasn't like, okay, it's finished, because it is life from that point. But it was just, here's a starting point, and here's at least going to be something to kind of get you going, Yeah. So I think the church has always wrestled with the idea of like, they get it, they know what we're supposed to do, and we were having these conversations earlier. But what is the end result? How do you communicate that to people, and they understand it? Because we don't have disciples now of anything else. Like, our cultural language is somebody's not a follower of fill in the blank. They work. This is what they do. They go study, they work. And so, our language of being a disciple of Jesus means what to most people? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because if you're a disciple of Jesus and you're a follower of Jesus, then you know that Jesus has a heart for the nations. So if I'm a follower of Jesus, at some point, that should be communicated and come across in my life. And if it doesn't, then am I really a follower of Jesus? Or if I just signed up to something else.
Well, like Mike said last night, we should live in a way that makes people ask that question.
Absolutely. Right. That's evangelism.
Yeah. Yep.
So what we did, because we don't emphasize that, and that doesn't work with most people, we create a very pragmatic way to do evangelism. And so we created Evangelism Explosion, CWT, EE, like all these different programs, which is nothing wrong with those types of things and mapping them out. I tend to be more pragmatic than not. But when Jesus gives you the way to do evangelism, go love God and love your neighbors yourself. And if you're doing those things and you're living your life that you're supposed to be living, and you're looking at the my goodness, the Sermon on the Mount, and he says stuff like, and if somebody tells you to walk 1 mile, walk 2. If somebody asks for your coat, give them your cloak. I mean, go overboard. Like, be generous. Be somebody who does more than you have to do, and the people are going to go, "What is your deal?" And we're not seeing people do that anymore. But yet now we don't even do this anymore. But back in my day, like, that was not emphasized. This was emphasized. Hey, can I ask you 2 questions? Number 1, if you were to die today, where would you go, heaven or hell? Oh, you think, okay, you think you would go to heaven. Number 2, here's my second question. If you were to go to heaven, and Jesus asked you this question, how would you answer it? Why should I let you into my heaven? Dude, that's the 2 diagnostic questions.
Yep.
And it like, when did it move from, hey, go out and live your life in a way that shows people there's something different about you and force them to ask the question, to, I'm just going to ask you 2 questions and put you on the spot. Like, what happened that we made that shift? And I think it's fine to engage in conversation, have gospel conversations, man, without question. But like, Jesus laid it out in the Sermon on the Mount pretty clearly. Like, live this way.
Yeah.
And if you live this way,
love.
they're going to know you by your love for each other. Like there's indicators of why people should know we are who we say we are. There's a passage in it's in Deuteronomy, I think, where Moses they're about to go into the promised land, and God comes and says, I can't go with you. Great story that Moses says, well, he says, I'm going to send an angel, and the angel's going to take you in, but I can't go. Because if I go, I'm probably going to kill all of you, right? Because you're just evil people. Like, I can't do that.
Yep.
And Moses said, if you're not going to go, I'm not going. He said, number one, I would rather stay in the desert with you than go into the promised land with an angel. Number two, if you don't go with us, this is the big one right here. Mm. If you don't go with us, what distinguishes us between all the other people? Mm. Dude, that's it right there, dude. Mm-hmm. So it's a great question to ask today. What distinguishes us between all the other people in Lebanon? Mm-hmm. That's a great question, man.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was Moses. Like Moses said, God, you are our distinguishing mark. Mm-hmm. And if you don't go with us, we're just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's all of that kind of thought mentality that makes discipleship what it is, and that's kind of why I asked Mike, because Mike got into Sunday night this idea of what post-Christian culture looks like and how, how we're going to, and he's right. And I appreciate Mike's not a sensationalist. Mike's not going to get up there and throw all these stats out and get you all, worried and messed up and like, oh my God, he said, I still think there's hope for the American church.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't get there. Maybe we won't get to a point to where people just don't care, but we are moving into a culture of a large group of people who feel like the church hates them. Mm-hmm. And we've done that. We've done that to a lost community.
Yep.
And so Mike talks about culture of honor. Mike talks about those types of things, which I think are great concepts. But then the question is that this is what we've painted the church to be. Like this is what we've created. And if you want to call it Southern Baptist life, whatever, we've just created it in traditional church life. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now we're being challenged to honor a culture of people who aren't like us, who don't talk like us, who don't have the same values. And so how do you do that when your church has been taught to fight for who they think they are and their identity? Mm. See, that's the biggest challenge I see is that, and now let me say this, I think there's a tipping point in there. I think we've seen churches that don't know how to do this well go over, like the tipping point has become for them. They just become those people. You look at the Methodist Church and what the Methodist Church is going through right now. To where they've decided, hey, listen, we're going to recognize all of these different groups, and so they lost their distinguishing mark. Mm. Our distinguishing mark is Jesus and the transformation that he brings in our life. When we lose that as our distinguishing mark, we have nothing. We're just like any other organization, right? So how do you cling to that while at the same time wanting people to know that you love them and you respect them and you honor them, even in the context of where they are in life, and it may not be where we are. Mm. Like that's tough, dude.
It is.
Because that's where Jesus lived.
Yep, 100%. Yes, there's a lot of different directions we can go with all that we did this month. We had the WMU study where they looked at the Middle East, the mission trips launch, our Discovery Day where Mike kind of shared what it looks like to be involved in mission in England and in Europe. Then we had Mike, he obviously preached on Sunday morning. We had the Missions Quipping on Sunday night where we looked at a post-Christian and post-modern world, what that looks like, and just for us, what could be coming to America, but also like some things just that they're dealing with, what it looks like for us. And then our mission recap podcast as well. And I'll just say on that before anything else, I mentioned it actually, it's not posted yet. I mentioned it on the podcast that will be posted on Friday that we recorded. But honestly, I think all of the mission trip ones were great. Yeah. But I think every person in our church needs to hear the local missions one, which will actually be posted in December. Technically, it's the first Friday in December, just the way it all worked out. But when you talk about like what I've heard you ask the question before, like if Emmanuel didn't exist,
right,
would this community notice? Would they care? Would anyone around us that's not involved with Emmanuel care? And those the people in that room that did that podcast, the missions organizations and ministry, not organizations, but ministries within our church that were represented by the people in that room, if those did not exist, people in this community would notice. Like they are making an impact in this community, which is huge. So make sure you listen to that one for sure. But
yeah, that's awesome.
But kind of with the post-Christian culture concept, it's just hard to think about because, like, I guess this started happening for them in like the 70s, 80s. So it's hard to probably pinpoint like exactly what happened. But for me, the way I kind of wrap my mind around it is when you think of it generationally. So if you have parents who grew up in church, who know the value of church and of Christianity and of the Bible and make that a value in their kids' lives, well, whether their kids follow that or not, they at least understand that. Well, when their kids grow up, if they don't truly value it and see the need for raising their kids in that, maybe they grew up in this and understand it. So you're still not in that post-Christian culture yet. But when they don't make it an emphasis or a point of emphasis in their kids' life, well, when their kids grow up and have kids, they have no concept of what it looks like to go to church, what it looks like to be a follower of Christ. And so that's kind of when I think of it generationally, that's where I see that like post-Christian culture happening. So for us, what are some things that we can be doing, maybe as staff, but really more as the church, as the congregation? What do you think we can do? I hate to say safeguard, but to start to, and maybe I'm asking the question wrong because I'm wanting to say to protect against this, to safeguard against it, but I feel like it's less of a defense thing because then it's like it's coming for us. Maybe it's more of an offense thing, but how do we avoid our church or our community? I don't think maybe we can make an impact in all of America, but just from our context, how do we avoid moving into this post-Christian culture in America?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
Patty.
Wow.
Well, I think one of the things that I don't know if I started thinking about it last night or last night just kind of became an igniter that ignited some of the thoughts I've been wrestling through in my own head. But, you know, when I think about England, and this is anecdotal, so I don't really have any concrete evidence or any statistics to kind of lean to this, but obviously at some point in their history, God became irrelevant. Now, we know you can look historically at the church and, you know, when you think about the Protestant Reformation happening around the time of Henry VIII, and of course we know the Anglican Church came about at that point, and you get the separation from the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Protestants, and like all that was brewing over there in that area. And all of a sudden, and it was such a vibrant movement, especially Protestantism was such a vibrant movement away from the Catholic Church, and they become much more evangelical, like all of these types of things. Like it was an awesome movement. And so out of that bore, you know, your Great Awakenings, First Great Awakening, Second Great Awakening. And then all of a sudden this country was being settled and they began sending missionaries over here to make sure that all that was being spread. And so like you had this incredible fire for the gospel, like just unbelievable. And all of the dead people that we study and all the dead theologians and all the great preachers all were over there and all came from there. And so you got George Whitefield, you know, you've got Jonathan Edwards, you got like all these guys that we study, we read about and all this. And it was all during those times. Okay, so at what point did God become irrelevant? Where they just said, like, it just doesn't matter anymore. It's just not relevant. It's not a part of my life anymore. And in my view, that happened at some point historically. So I think about us, and I think about our culture, and I listen to the millennials and the Gen Zs, and you know, even being in the student ministry for so long, which all that's changed so much because the way we did student ministry when I was in it isn't the way they do it now. You know, so that's changed in just my lifetime. So you're watching people that are actually saying, it's just like, I don't get it. It don't matter. Like I don't get it, you know? And it's because you're already seeing people respond to churches. Like people don't want to go to churches and get yelled at all the time. Like they're like, yeah, we're out. We're done with that. Now that used to be the thing, you know? And now they're like, yeah, we don't need that. That's irrelevant. Okay. Then, so, you know, and I lived through the seeker movement, seeker sensitive movement, and they're like, yeah, that became irrelevant. So that came and went. Mm-hmm. And, you know, man, at a point we were planning worship services for lost people. How smart is that? Like that don't even make sense, but that's what we were doing. And so now you think, okay, we're just like, this is the thought I had last night, and I shared it with you guys. Like, at what point do people just get tired of the information? Mm. You know, the world continues to throw information out. Okay. I wonder how many people come to church and it's just information, you know? Now, thankfully, we still have a commitment to, at least a cultural commitment to our connection with God. Mm. We still feel like in this part of our country that, man, that should still be a part of our life somewhere. Now, I believe the millennials are definitely the generation that's questioning that. Without question. I think they're questioning this whole idea of, like, they're not committed to the cultural value of God in your life. I think that generation is going to be tough and down, right? So I think up to then, we still kind of held on to this idea of, well, if you kind of live in the Southeast, you've probably been raised in a family that has some kind of connected to church, and somewhere you're probably going to get connected to church. Right? I think millennials are going, yeah, I'm not sure we need it. So I think it's going to get a little tougher, which I think then challenges us to say, okay, at what point do they see this as just information? They get tired of the information and they just aren't connected anymore. Mm. Like, I could see that path when Mike was talking. It's almost like I could just see it drifting away, where if all we do is just disseminate information, they can find it other places.
Mm. It's true. And one of the things Mike said in his message Sunday morning was the time for casual Christianity is over.
Absolutely.
We're moving into that realm of intentionality, and it begins with hospitality within the home, bringing lost people in the church, in their lostness,
right?
Not waiting until lives are turned around.
Yep.
So there has to be that shift.
Yep.
In order for us to even have a chance.
Yeah.
To stave off that, we don't want it.
Because you can't get away from how people are built and wired. Mm-hmm. You know, built in the image of God. Even though they're lost, they're still created in the image of God. They're still created with eternity in their hearts. Mm-hmm. They're still created with, there will be in their life a need and desire for something more, something greater. So all those things are still there. So the sad thing about it is when a culture of people that are created and born with those innate desires to seek out something more, look at the church and say, yeah, that's not it. And they keep looking. Mm-hmm. That's when I believe you're turning that corner. My question is, are the millennials at that point? You know, is the millennial generation and below still looking, they're still looking, but they're looking at us and going, no, okay, next. Yeah. You know, that's the scary part, you know, because they still want, speaking of millennials, they still want connection. They still want relationships. They still want community. You know, but the question is, are we connecting the dots and showing them that here's where all of that is met in Jesus? You know, you can't get away from 2 Corinthians 5. Like, I'm so glad Mike read that, you know, that God reconciled the world to himself through Jesus, not holding their sins against them. Mm-hmm. You know, and then he gave us the ministry of reconciliation.
Yeah. Oh, that was the verse I was talking
about. Yeah. And so, you know, because new creature in Christ, like, so all that's still relevant and still the same. We're the ones that mess it up. You know, we're the ones that paint it a certain way and frame it a certain way. And you know, you deal with just people fighting over stupid stuff, and you go, wait a minute, this is not anything. This is not 2 Corinthians 5.
Yep.
You know, so let's remember, we've got a generation of people that we're losing.
Yeah.
Like, I know we've said that over the years. Oh, we're only one generation away. We're only one generation away, and you know, I think statistically that's probably true, but I think it's probably more real today than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
If we lose the millennials, if we lose that generation, we're headed toward a post-Christian culture.
Mm-hmm. And it's being a millennial, and speaking to this, what I've seen anyways is, I think the millennials are kind of this turning point, because I agree. We dealt with, like, we were kind of in a weird transition of this technology age.
Because here's the deal, bro. Worlds. You have a questioning heart.
100%.
You do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, bro, what's wrong with you, man? You just got to
just do it.
Yeah. Like, what's the problem?
Yeah. And while I'm sitting here thinking, and I think we went from a because I said so generation to a why question generation. Yeah. Like, your generation is very, and my parents in a lot of ways, and parenting, sometimes it is because I said so. It just is.
Sure.
But at the same time, like that generation is very much like, well, this is how it's always been. I remember my youth pastor saying so many times, well, it's because I've done it this way. Right. You know, I've done it for 20 years. Why would I, you know? And so there's this idea of like, oh, this is the way you do it. And that's what my parents told me. So this is what it is. Mm-hmm. Whereas my generation, we're kind of in this weird spot of somewhat understanding pre-technology and living through that a little bit, but then also having the social media and the technology side too. And, social media, just like it's such a fake world, and we see that, and then it's like we realize that it's like, well, what is real? Now I'm questioning everything. Like, why do I need what? You know, everything's a why and a what's real and what's the point of all this? And then now we're passing that to the Gen Zs of like, now that's the only world they've ever lived in, right? And so you see it start to unravel and unfold itself.
And what's funny about that is, like, my generation of leaders, like 60 and above, aren't used to having to deal with that. But I've got a staff, you know, and you have a staff full of people like that. You're just going, dude, just do what you're supposed to do. What's the problem? You know, because that's how we grew up. I mean, we were told what to do. We did what our pastors told us to do, and you know, and so it was just completely different. You know, mm-hmm. You're just not used to this questioning generation that is like, you know, and you're, mm-hmm. but it's not questioning authority. It's just questioning the why. It's mm-hmm. just like, I don't get it. That doesn't make sense. Yep. You know, which I think is a great challenge, because I think it presses us to, like, we've got to figure out how to reach the millennials and the Gen Zs. Yep. We've got to, and thank God, praise God. You know, right now we have a great number of that group of people coming to be a part of what God's doing here at Emmanuel. I feel the burden of connecting those dots for those families to continue to answer that why for them, because if you don't, at some point, I'm just telling you, at some point they're just going to go, is that it? Mm. Like this, like we've been, this is it? Yeah. You know, like older people will come, join, never question the experience. Boomers never question the experience. Yep. Because that's what it is. You come, you join. I mean, think about this, man. This would be a great study to do. Like, how much time does it take the average millennial to join a church versus a boomer couple? Or even take it a step further, what's the percentage of millennials that actually join the church in the first place? Because they don't get it. Like, they don't get it. Like, what's so like, normally, like back in my day, this is what you did. You visited a church. The second Sunday you visited Sunday school. The third Sunday you joined. Like, that's just what you did. Yeah. I mean, you didn't attend. Yeah. You know, because if you were going to go, because you were going to try it out, and then you're going to maybe go try Sunday school. It's so funny. It's like when I talk to older people that join our church, that's exactly what they tell me. Mm-hmm. They said, okay, we've come to worship. Next Sunday, we're going to try Sunday school. And the next Sunday, we might join. And I was like, man, that's awesome. That's what I'm used to. Yeah. You know? And then what they're saying is, if we like Sunday school. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. If I can find a class that's friendly, you know? Yeah. And thankfully, we've got great friendly classes. Absolutely. But then I'll have people come down and join, and and they're in that kind of that age range, and they'll go, yeah, we've been coming for a year and a half. What? Like where but that's just,
or 5 years,
or 5,
like,
exactly.
Like,
yeah. Or new staff members who don't ever join your church.
Yeah.
You go, what? I need to do what?
Wait.
I thought when I was hired, because like even Cody was like, I just figured when I was hired here.
I thought the same thing
like
when I came.
Like I'm a member.
Yeah.
Like, no, bro, you got to join, dude. You got to go old school.
But that just proves the point of like, because I came and I'm like, all right, I am part of this staff. I'm part of this church.
Yeah.
Now, so
why wouldn't you be?
I thought that's what it meant to be a member. So like, why do I need to just walk up in front of people and say, hey, you want to be a member?
Hey, Cameron, you're not a member yet.
What? Just to get on a roll? I am a member. I did, but we did the deal. But
yeah.
But I think that goes into this whole post-Christian idea of what could be to come. Because you start, all right, where to take this? At the end of the day, I think the avoiding a post-Christian culture answer comes down to not staff. I think we can help define the why in ways, and we help to facilitate the making of disciples. But at the end of the day, avoiding the post-Christian culture is the congregation. It's the full church, the body of Christ. When we're all bought into this mission of, and not just the mission of a man, like the mission of Jesus, what he called us to do in Scripture and in his life. When we deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow him like he called us to, that's when we begin to avoid a post-Christian culture, because we're doing what we were supposed to be doing in the first place. Yeah. And so I think the problem is when it comes to, and I've seen it in my life, I've seen it in friends of mine and in conversations I've had with millennials, Gen Zs, people that ask these why questions about everything, question everything. It's like, even when it comes down to, why do I need to join the church? Why do I need to give to the church? Why do I need to serve? Like a lot of it comes back to, what does this do for me? Yeah. What's the point of it, and how does this benefit me? Yeah. Because we live in a culture of capitalism, and how it's all about me and instant gratification and this and that. And so it's and that's not fair for every situation, but for a lot of it is. But still answering the question of, why do I need to be a member? Why do I need to give? Yeah. Why do I need to be involved in a life group? Why do I need to hold the door for somebody? We've got other people to do that. Yeah. Like I'm too busy in my schedule. I'll just come and receive and then go about my business, and I've done what I need to do. And so it comes back to, so my challenge for millennials is, because my mind's going a bunch of different directions here. The problem is we've used that as a crutch, because we've asked the why questions, and we want to know the why. And I think it's important for us to know the why. It's important for us as staff to communicate the why. But at the same time, we've used that as a crutch, as I may somewhat understand the why, but if I just keep asking the why, I don't have to do the work. Right. Or I don't have to get involved. I don't have to commit more time. I don't have to take up my cross. If you don't tell me the why, then I have an excuse out of doing what I'm supposed to be doing and what I know I'm supposed to be doing. Yeah. And so for the millennials, Gen Zs, the people who ask those questions, my challenge to you would be, do it. Like you know the why. Scripture is the why. Yeah. Like, just do what we know we're supposed to do. Yeah. And if there are why questions, then ask those questions. Because I think a lot of times too, we question it in our mind or in our circles where we know we can get affirmation, but we don't actually go to the source to ask the why and get the answer. And then for the other generations, the because I said so generation, I'll put it that way, help to understand the why and give a little bit of patience there too, which is tough, because it's very easy to because it says so, like, because my parents said so, because your parents said so, because it works. It's what we do. Yeah. But I think if we just rely on that, we're going to miss the mark and hit this point where it's like, okay, well, that may be what you do. It's not what I do. Yeah. And then we'll hit a point to where it's like, okay, now what do we do? Because we've tried this, it didn't work. And now we're in this culture and have to figure out how to regroup these people and reach people in a completely different culture. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, and what you don't want to do, I thought about this yesterday too, is you don't want to get people to love you and love your church. You want people to love Jesus. That's right. Right. And I think there's a natural progression in that, because I think people get connected to people, and I think people get connected to a body,
which is great, and there's a natural progression, but that natural progression should lead to them realizing it's their love for Jesus that motivates what they do, not their love for their pastor or their church.
That's right.
Right. So like I think about generosity, and I think, man, I don't want, like, I appreciate people giving because they love their pastor, and I appreciate people giving to the church because they love the community of Emmanuel. But you want people to give because they love Jesus, and Jesus has given to them so much.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So like, but I don't think that just happens overnight.
Yeah.
I think that's a process.
Yep.
You know, because if it stops somewhere in the process, the person leaves and they leave. The person, you know, gets disgruntled about the church because they made a decision they didn't like and they quit, you know. But like if it eventually gets down to that point where, man, what's motivating me, driving me is my love for Christ and his love for me, then like none of that other stuff is going to affect that. You know, and that's what, but it's a journey. Like you don't get there automatically. You know, so I appreciate the journey, but we got to keep pushing people toward, man, it's about Christ. It's not about any of us. You know, that's the thing about, like, what's so interesting, man, when this conversation it can go so many different directions, as you said, Cameron, is as I'm watching, like, I mean, I remember 30 years ago, we were talking about worship wars. Really? 30 years ago, dude. Now, that obviously came out of the Jesus movement, out of the late 60s, early 70s. And
I know I was born in the 90s, but it's hard to think about the fact that the 90s was 30 years ago.
I know.
Just that in itself.
Yeah. How crazy is that? but so, and churches, you know, are still battling that, right? Because they're still hanging on. Hanging on to what? You know? So it just goes to show you that our attention got focused on a view of church instead of focused on people. You know, the whole Jesus movement was about, are you focusing on an institution or are you focusing on people? And the battle between those two things. And so it carries on. It carries on. Now there's going to be a time where a generation of people are going to be gone.
Yeah.
And the last of the Mohicans are going to be gone. Okay, so then what are we going to be fighting for then? You know, and what is that going to look like? It's so interesting because is that what leads to? Because I got to think about those people that are still kind of like, praise God, they're fighting for the integrity of what they feel like the integrity of the church is. And like, that's awesome, man. You got people in their 70s and 80s who are going, hey, we believe in the church and we believe in what God's doing through his church, which is awesome. And you want that. But man, we've told, as Mike said last night, a generation of people that the church hates them. And that's sad.
Yep.
Because the individuals, what's interesting, the individuals that I know that are living alternative lifestyles, a lot of those people are people who were raised in the church, and at some point they became angry with the church. It's just weird. Mike was talking about this last night, and I was just sitting here and I was putting names and faces to what he was talking about. And I thought, you know, we told a generation of people who struggled with sin that the church hated them. And then and they may never get over that. Because they disconnect Jesus from that church that those people represented. And it's so weird. It's such a dichotomy. It's just such a tension ball, you know, that you got to weave through. Because we cannot compromise truth. But Jesus loved people. And we've got to figure out how to love people without compromising truth. That's what we have to figure out how to do. Because Mike talked about, you know, belong and then believe and then behave, right? To where we want believe, behave, belong. You know, we want that pattern, and that's traditionally been our pattern. But now, you know, what Mike's seeing, like in a post-Christian culture, is people want to belong to something first, so that they can be around people and understand what it means to believe, and then once they believe, they see their behavior changing. You know, which is really that's how it happens. But we formalized church membership, and you got to be this, and this before you're a member. And that's why that kind of pattern doesn't work with us.
Yeah.
Because of what we formerly, and so anyway, there's a lot to that conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Let me change the subject and say one thing before we quit, because I think this was kind of interesting last night.
Yeah.
Insight I had in the passage that Mike preached, because maybe I just haven't thought about it this way before, but he said, Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me daily.
Yeah.
Something that popped in my head that I thought, man, I never really thought about it that way before, is when Jesus says, deny yourself. Jesus didn't say, take up my cross.
Mm.
He said, take up your cross.
Right.
And follow me daily. And then I thought, so here's where my mind went on that. Jesus' cross that he bared isn't my cross to bear.
Mm.
He bore the cross of paying for the sins of the world.
That's right.
I can't carry that cross.
Right.
That's not my cross to carry. But he gave me a cross to carry. And my cross to carry is my life and what I'm doing and what I'm living and the things I'm having to lead us through. And, it's so easy to start, any of us could have a pity party at any point in time in our ministries, right? Because we go, man, I can't believe this, whatever. Hey, pick up your cross.
Yeah.
Like that's your cross, And so we have been called to pick up our crosses and follow him daily.
Mm.
So in the context of me bearing my cross, the things he's called me to do, the things that he's, whatever my life is and what he's called me to do, that's my cross.
Mm.
And so I bear that for him and for his glory. And you know what? If I want to whine and complain about this or that or whatever, that's not your cross. Like you've not been called to bear my cross. I've not been called to bear yours. I just thought that was interesting because we always think it means pick up Jesus' cross and follow him. I can't, because I started thinking about it, I'm like, man, I can't carry your cross.
Right.
Like your cross was the cross of the payment for the sins of the world. That you ain't called me to that.
Mm.
But you have called me to bear my cross. Yeah, have you ever? I don't know if you ever thought about that. Like you ever noticed that he said your cross.
Yeah,
it doesn't say my cross.
Mm.
And we're supposed to carry our cross, as he said, in an upside down kingdom.
Yeah,
yeah.
According to the way that Jesus modeled life
exactly
and holiness. Right, the last will be first.
Right,
first will be last. All the things.
Right.
Living to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's completely contrary to human nature.
Right.
It blows my mind.
When he was talking to our 8:30 and our 11:15 crowds, it was so interesting to watch him kind of change his tone, not his tone, but just kind of his emphasis.
Yeah.
His approach and emphasis. And anytime I'm doing a message, if it's about parenting or whatever, I'm adjusting it obviously to our crowds. But I caught myself yesterday listening to him in the context of an 8:30, 11:15 crowd, not a 10 o'clock crowd. Because I thought to myself as Mike was talking, man, so what does it look like for me at 75? Like I don't know the answer to that question yet. I think about Brother Owens, who died in his, I don't know if was he 90? Was he in his
80s?
Yeah, late 80s.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Walking up the steps of a church to go preach one more sermon, and I'm thinking, man, like that dude carried his cross to the end of his days, and I think, man, like I actually kind of had this thought for the first time, maybe, probably ever. All right. Cause I joke about being in the fourth quarter or whatever, but the reality is like, what am I going to do in the last years of my life? They're going to make a difference. Let's say it's 20 more years. I mean, reality is with the health of my, my family, it could be 20 years. Make it to 80. That's probably good for a Pratt. So let's just say 81. So that means I got 20 years left. So what's the last 20 years of my life going to look like? Where you just go at the end of it, you just go, you know what, man, I gave it everything I had.
Mm-hmm.
and not, because you guys are, you're not as old as I am, and you're definitely not close to that. You're not thinking that way, But I think about, like, I watch my father-in-law who's 88 and he's still giving it all he's got. And I think about other people, but then you also think and go, like, it's just not like, life is just not saying there's some point out there in my life where I can say I'm done and now I'm cruising until I die and go to heaven. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Especially not, when everything's turning and changing. So anyway, it's just, I think a lot of things, it's always hard for me as a pastor to sit back and to be in church and not be preaching. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's also very refreshing when I can just sit there and I can just zero in and listen to what he's saying and really think about how that applies to my life. And Julie and I are sitting there and I know she's processing it like I'm processing it. And we're sitting there thinking about this. And I know because I shouldn't say this about Julie because it may not be true, but I'm just making an assumption here, is that because she knows how much I love Northern England. And so I can just imagine her sitting there listening to Mike, thinking in her mind, Lord, I know what Jeff's thinking. And I know how much he loves Northern England. So like I'm thinking, because I'm sitting here thinking, I bet I know what you're thinking right now, because I do. And I don't know what that means. And I always used to think, Mike always used to talk about, I don't think they do this anymore, but back in the 90s when I went over there, they had this program where retired pastors could come over there and live 6 months. They put you up in a place, they gave you a car to drive, and you could actually pastor an Anglican church or a small church for 6 months. Huh. These are little interims. Like how cool would it be to go live in Northern England for 6 months? Yeah. And just tool around the countryside, with your wife and just enjoy all the history and all that and love on a group of people for, I just always thought, man, that'd be the coolest thing in the world. Yeah. But then he started talking about, man, they just engaged a 70-year-old couple to go over there and love on the young missionaries who are there planting churches and getting after it. Oh, then I thought, oh, dude, man, what's up? Like, that sounds so enticing. Yeah. To think about going over and mentoring and loving on, 3 or 4 couples that are, trying to plant churches and really trying to, and like your job is just to pour into those couples, right, and to mentor those guys, know. Man, dude, that sounds cool. Yeah, that sounds cool. So maybe Mike has some short-term opportunities to do stuff like that. like it would be really cool for me to think about, man, going over there for a couple of weeks and just pouring into a couple of young pastors. Yeah. And just letting them ask questions, like just encouraging them. Yeah. Like that would be really, really cool. Mm-hmm. Like I could really get into something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to have to cut this part out of the podcast or else people are going to get nervous about Jeff leaving us.
No, I'm not going nowhere. No. From my home base in Lebanon, Tennessee. Yeah. Absolutely.
Nice. So it's been good. I said it might be a little short. It was about normal time, but
the topic demands it.
Yeah, for sure. And we could have gone a lot deeper into it too. But I think the biggest thing is just prayers. Pray for our country. Pray for the direction that we're headed. And as Mike said in the thing on Sunday night, the missions equipping, he said, and he actually said this is the first time he's ever said it out loud, but he said he's very hopeful about this next generation. Yeah. You see what's going on at Asbury and at Auburn and all these different just pockets of young believers who are just sold out, like experiencing true revival and experiencing Jesus in the midst of that, not in the midst, but as the leader of that. And so I think there is hope, but I think at the same time we've got to continue in praying for our country, praying for the state of the church and where we're at, praying for Emmanuel and what the future of that looks like, praying for patience and wisdom for our staff as we move forward. And then also just, again, like I said, doing our part is huge. Like we've got to step in as the body of Christ to do the things that we know that we've been called to do. It's easy to take that back seat and just be like, well, we'll get there, hopefully it happens or, somebody else can do whatever. But we all collectively make the body of Christ. The church is not the staff. And then we've got the congregation. And just like I say, the congregation is the body of Christ, the staff is part of that. Yeah. That's why I think I don't need to be a member because I'm on staff. But
millennial view.
We're all part of the process.
Well, and think about this as we close. If God is is raising up another movement like he did in the late 60s and early 70s, just know this: that movement radically challenged the church. So if he's doing it again, then he's wanting to shake up the church, and he's wanting to challenge the church, and we've got to be ready for that. There's no doubt that something's happening. Like 14,000 people at Arkansas, University of Arkansas, that just doesn't happen. Auburn just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
You could almost say, well, Asbury, it kind of makes sense. It happened in the Jesus movement. Maybe they just want to try to recreate, like you could. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm saying you could kind of explain that away, right? You don't do that in secular universities, where there's no reason whatsoever something like that should be happening. So if God's doing this in the Gen Zs, whether it be millennials or Gen Zs, I guess more Gen Zs, right? Yeah. If he's doing that,
a young millennial.
Yeah, if he's doing that in that generation, then it's going to challenge the church, and we got to be ready for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and all of this conversation is so timely as we push forward with our building program
right.
for generations to come.
Absolutely.
That we remain spirit-minded in all the decisions moving forward, in everything that we do, to raise up the next generation to serve the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've got great people that are boomers and that are older generations that see the need for the next generation and have committed to that.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome. I think that's the beauty of what God's doing here right now in this particular time in history, is that God is raising up a group of people, not just one generation, to see the need for the generations to come. And if we keep Christ in the middle of it, we can get there.
Absolutely.
So
it's been a good one. It's been a great Govember. Thank you guys for listening, and happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, yeah.
I hope your sweet potato casserole doesn't run out of the pan. Julie,
I don't believe you'll be having any, Jeff Pratt.
I don't know.
Tuna casserole on your plate.
Not. Well, it's not Christina's sweet potato casserole that does that. I got that.
Sorry, Julie.
I got that. Yeah, whopping. So, all right. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Nice. We'll see y'all next week.